The day my husband filed for divorce, he didn't sit me down. He didn't explain. He didn't even look uncomfortable. He stood in the doorway of the living room like a stranger who had memorized the layout of my life and decided it no longer belonged to me. "I want everything," he said flatly. "Get out of my house." The words landed heavy, but what came next crushed what little air I had left. "I don't need you," he continued, his voice sharp with irritation, "and I definitely don't need you and your stinky sick daughter." For a moment the room went quiet, not because the world stopped, but because something inside me did. My daughter was asleep in the next room, pale, fragile, breathing softly the way she did when her body was fighting battles no one could see. I had spent nights sitting on the floor beside her bed, counting her breaths, whispering promises I wasn't sure I could keep, and this man who once held her as a newborn, reduced her to something disposable. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I just nodded. That surprised him. He expected tears, expected me to fall apart, to plead, to remind him of our years together. Instead, I stood there quietly, my hands folded in front of me like I was attending a funeral. In a way, I was. Not for the marriage, but for the woman I used to be. He mistook my silence for defeat. "Good," he said. "I'll have my lawyer send the papers. You can take your clothes and go. Everything else stays. My house, my furniture, my memories, my sacrifices, all reduced to everything else." I walked past him without a word and went to my daughter's room. I watched her chest rise and fall, and I felt something shift deep in my bones. This wasn't about me anymore. It never really had been. It was about her. And I knew in that moment that I could survive anything, as long as she was safe. I packed only what we needed, a few clothes, her medication, her favorite blanket. I left behind wedding photos, furniture I had picked out, dishes I had washed 1,000 times. I didn't take a single thing that could make him accuse me of wanting more than survival. When I walked out of that house, he didn't follow me. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't ask where we were going. He smiled. And I let him. Because what he didn't understand, what he never bothered to see, was that I wasn't giving up. I was stepping back. I was letting him believe his version of the story, that I was weak, desperate, and broken. But as I buckled my daughter into the car and drove away with the sun setting behind us, I made a quiet promise. Not out loud, not with anger, just truth. I will not fight you now. I will not beg you. I will let you think you've won. Because sometimes the smartest thing a woman can do is wait. And he had no idea what waiting was about to cost him. The first thing I learned after leaving was how loud silence can be. There were no slammed doors, no sharp words cutting through the air, no tension clinging to the walls, just quiet. A small rented room, thin curtains, a mattress on the floor, and my daughter sleeping beside me, her hand curled around my finger like she was afraid I might disappear too. Everyone thought I was broken. Friends spoke to me gently, like my name itself might crack if said too loudly. Family avoided my eyes, offering pity instead of faith. And him. He didn't think of me at all. To him, I was already erased. A problem neatly removed. A woman who had walked away with nothing because she had nothing left. I let them all believe it. I signed nothing without reading it. I said little. I agreed to delays. I showed no anger, no desperation. I never argued when he demanded more. Each time we crossed paths, I kept my voice soft and my posture small. Not because I was weak, but because I was watching. Late at night, when my daughter finally slept, I opened boxes I had carried out of that house without him noticing. Old folders, envelopes stuffed into drawers he never touched, bank statements, property documents, medical bills he had refused to help pay, messages he thought were deleted, lies told so casually he never imagined they'd be remembered. Piece by piece, I rebuilt the truth. I kept a notebook beside me, writing dates, amounts, patterns. I learned the language of numbers the way some people learn a foreign tongue, slowly, carefully, until it started to make sense. I discovered accounts I had never been told about, transfers made while I was sitting beside hospital beds. Money moved quietly like footsteps in the dark. Each discovery hurt, but pain had changed its shape. It no longer weakened me, it sharpened me. I protected my daughter fiercely. Every appointment, every prescription, every school note was documented. I stopped apologizing for her illness. I stopped shrinking when people looked uncomfortable. She wasn't a burden. She was my reason. And somewhere along the way, I stopped begging. Even in my own thoughts. I didn't beg for his respect. I didn't beg for fairness. I didn't beg for mercy. I prepared. When it was time to find a lawyer, I didn't choose the loudest name or the most expensive office. I chose someone who listened, someone who read every page I brought with careful eyes, someone who didn't interrupt when my voice shook, not because I was weak, but because the story mattered. "You've been patient," she said finally, closing the folder. "And patience leaves a trail." For the first time since the divorce was filed, I allowed myself to breathe. My husband, meanwhile, grew more confident by the day. He told people he had handled it. He joked about how easy it had been. He walked into meetings like a man who had already won, backed by a lawyer who believed the same thing. They underestimated silence. They underestimated the woman who no longer needed to argue to be right. By the time the court date was set, I had nothing left to prove emotionally. I wasn't there to convince anyone of my pain. I wasn't there to ask for sympathy. I was there with facts, with records, with a story that had been carefully preserved while everyone else was busy dismissing it. On the morning of the final hearing, I looked at my reflection and barely recognized myself. Not because I was different on the outside, but because the fear was gone. I didn't need him to lose. I just needed the truth to speak. And it was ready. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not in temperature, but in feeling. Polished wood, stiff benches, and an air so heavy with rules that even breathing felt regulated. I sat quietly beside my lawyer, hands folded in my lap, my face calm. From the outside, I probably looked exactly the way my husband remembered me, small, silent, already resigned. That illusion comforted him. He walked in confidently, tailored suit, chin lifted, his lawyer at his side like a shield. They didn't glance at me twice. Why would they? To them, this was a formality, a final stamp on a story they believed had been written months ago. When proceedings began, his lawyer spoke first. Smooth, certain. He painted a picture of a man who had been generous, patient, and wronged. He described me as someone who had left willingly, who had contributed little, who was now asking for more than she deserved. My husband nodded along, barely hiding his smirk. I kept my eyes forward. Then it was our turn. My lawyer stood slowly. No dramatics, no raised voice, just calm. She began with dates, simple ones: marriage, property acquisition, medical expenses, employment gaps. She spoke clearly, laying a foundation so solid it was impossible to interrupt without looking nervous. And then she started opening folders. The first document changed the room. A financial statement my husband had sworn didn't exist. Then another, and another. Transfers, deposits, accounts tied neatly together by timelines he had forgotten, or assumed no one would notice. His lawyer shifted in his seat. I watched his confidence crack in small, almost invisible ways. A tightening of the jaw, a glance that lingered too long on a page, a hand reaching for a pen that suddenly wasn't there. When my lawyer mentioned money moved during hospital stays, his lawyer finally looked up. "Objection," he said, a little too quickly. The judge asked for clarification. My lawyer handed over more documents. Messages followed. Not emotional ones, not dramatic accusations. Just facts. Plain, undeniable. Promises made, statements contradicted, patterns that told a story without needing commentary. That was when his lawyer turned pale, not metaphorically, physically. The color drained from his face as he flipped through the pages. faster now, like he was searching for an exit that didn't exist. He leaned toward my husband, whispering urgently. My husband's smile vanished, his posture stiffened. For the first time he looked at me, not with anger, but with confusion, as if he was seeing me for the first time. The judge asked questions, careful ones, direct ones. Each answer dug the hole deeper. The courtroom, once dismissive, grew attentive. Even the clerk looked up. When the topic turned to my daughter, my chest tightened, but my lawyer didn't let it become emotional. She presented medical records, documented refusals and expenses that had been ignored. No accusations, just evidence. Silence followed. My husband tried to speak, but his lawyer placed a hand on his arm. Too late. The damage was done. The image he had built so carefully was collapsing under its own weight. I never raised my voice. I never interrupted. I never smiled. I just sat there, breathing steadily, watching the truth do exactly what I had trusted it to do. By the time the judge announced a recess, the room felt different, heavy in another way, expectant. As everyone stood, my husband avoided my eyes. His lawyer stared at the floor, papers clutched too tightly in his hands. And I realized something then, as clear as daylight. I hadn't come to fight. I had come to reveal. And there was no unseeing what had already been shown. When the judge returned, the courtroom felt smaller, like the walls had quietly moved in to listen. No one spoke. Even my husband, who had once filled every space with his certainty, sat rigid and silent. His lawyer no longer leaned back with confidence. He leaned forward now, hands clasped, eyes dull with calculation that had come far too late. The judge began to speak, voice steady, measured, and unhurried. And each word landed carefully. The findings were clear. Financial inconsistencies, assets undisclosed, responsibilities neglected. The marriage had not ended because I walked away. It had ended because the truth had been buried under convenience and cruelty. The judge spoke of fairness, of accountability, of the importance of protection where vulnerability existed. When the house was mentioned, I felt my breath catch. It was no longer described as his. It was described as marital property. When assets were discussed, they were no longer abstract numbers. They were responsibilities, ones he could not outrun. Accounts he thought were invisible were brought into the light. Decisions he made in silence were given weight and consequence. Then came my daughter. The judge spoke her name gently, spoke of her needs, of care, of stability, of dignity. The word burden never appeared. Instead, there was obligation, compassion, duty. Everything my husband had tried to deny with a sentence spoken in anger was now recognized in law. The ruling followed. Support, protection, fair division, oversight, not punishment, justice. I felt something loosen in my chest, something I hadn't realized I had been holding together with sheer will. My hands trembled just slightly as the final words were spoken. Not because I was overwhelmed with victory, but because I was finally allowed to stop surviving. My husband stood slowly when it was over. He looked older, smaller, not ruined, but exposed. He didn't argue. He didn't protest. There was nothing left to say. His lawyer gathered the papers in silence, avoiding everyone's eyes, as if hoping the floor might open and take the moment with it. As we walked out, the sound of footsteps echoed behind me, but I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. Outside, the air felt different. Lighter. I closed my eyes for just a second and let the sunlight touch my face, the way it had that evening when I drove away with nothing but a promise. I had kept it. I didn't win by taking revenge. I didn't win by humiliating him or destroying his life. I won by refusing to disappear, by protecting my child, by letting the truth stand where lies once did. That house was never just a building. It was time, effort, love given freely. And now, it was no longer a symbol of loss, but of survival reclaimed. My daughter reached for my hand as we walked to the car, her grip warm and trusting. She didn't know what had happened inside those walls, and she didn't need to. All she needed to know was that we were safe. And we were. Behind me, a chapter closed quietly. No shouting, no dramatic exit, just an ending that spoke for itself. He had told me to leave with nothing. He never imagined I would leave with everything that truly mattered.